Right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So in today's episode, I interview Summit Strength graduate Amy, who's recently come off an amazing hiking adventure in Iceland. And in this episode, she talks through a little bit about her training, her preparations, and shares some of her experiences hiking in this amazing country. So if you've ever considered hiking in Iceland, I think this is going to be a fantastic episode for you. So with that being said, let's get into it. All right. Hello, Amy, and a big welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Because I'm really looking forward to chatting through things. Because as we were saying before we just started, I don't think I've had anyone on the podcast to talk through your particular trip before. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And so I guess to kick things off, do you just want to give us a quick overview? Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? And what is your background in hiking?
Okay. My name is Amy Maxwell, and I am a licensed clinical social worker and a doctor of psychology. So I am a mental health clinician, and I work currently, I have a private practice in psychotherapy. And I also work for an organization that provides mental health services and peer coaching, peer support specialists to individuals primarily who are seeking to overcome substance use disorders. I specialize somewhat in addictions, whether they are chemical addictions, alcohol addictions, but also what we call process addictions like gambling or gaming or other behavioral addictions. And I live in incredibly beautiful Boulder, Colorado. But I was born and raised in New York City, New York, which is very different from Boulder, Colorado. And I really started to hike, when I was a kid. I was lucky enough to go to sleepaway camp starting at the age of 8, I think. And it got me out of the city and up into the beautiful woods of Maine. And I I really loved walking through the woods as a kid around the camp and sort of the quiet stillness of that experience. And then as an adolescent, I spent my summers in Tyrol, in that portion of Austria, and I started hiking in earnest, and I hiked almost every day. And that's certainly an incredible place to do that. And then I just sort of, kept at it. I moved out of Manhattan when I was 27 years old to upstate New York, and lived on 3.5 acres, and sort of realized that I was no longer a city person, and really needed to be outdoors more. And so, throughout my life, I've been fortunate enough to live in places where I had the proximity to some great places to hike, whether it was state parks or nature preserves. And for anybody that knows Boulder, Colorado, we are right up against the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. So I can be, in an incredible sort of landscape pretty quickly from my house. And it's just, I think as I've matured, and especially with the work that I do, it's my reset button. It's often how I process things, and it's my time. It's really the primary thing I do for myself. I'm a wife, I'm a parent, I have friends, but I would much rather go on a nice long hike, in terms of self-care than really doing anything else. So I hope that's the brief bullet point answer you were looking for.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I guess next question is then, before we started working together, I've obviously got this background in hiking and all of this. Before we actually started helping working together, what was your typical approach to training or physical preparation for these types of things?
So, so I ski in the winter season, and we get a fair amount of snow here. So it's not impossible to hike. Occasionally I'll snowshoe, although that's a very different animal. Um, so I would kind of come out of ski season and say, oh, goody, right? Like after the mud has gone away, because in Colorado, we have what's called mud season, where it isn't really snowing anymore, but there's so much snow and ice that it's just horribly muddy. So by the time June, maybe mid-June rolls around, things are dry, and then I would go out for my first hike and realize how incredibly out of shape I was for hiking. And my approach was like, I just have to keep doing it, and then I'll get back in hiking shape and I'll go longer and harder and higher. And I didn't give a whole lot of thought to specific conditioning for hiking. I do some specific conditioning for skiing because, of course, that uses kind of a really particular set of muscles. But, I sort of thought, oh, well, I'll just get out there and then, in a few weeks, I'll feel really good and strong. So I just didn't really take it into account, to be honest.
And then what did make you decide to reach out for extra help? Like, what was the inciting incident? What was the goal? And what did you feel like you needed a bit of extra help with?
Yeah. Um, so I had come across this hiking trip, this hut to hut hiking trip, a few years ago. And I have a really close friend who I hike with almost every week. And I had said to her a few years ago, I had shown her this hut to hut hiking trip in Iceland. And I was like, hey, we need to do this. And she's rather agreeable and she's a phenomenal traveler. She's traveled all over the world. So she was like, okay, great. So I thought about it and thought about it. And then last September, I turned 60. And I thought to myself, now is the time. I really want to do that trip. And I would like to do it with some girlfriends. I did ask my husband first. I just want to say, as the disclaimer, I asked my husband first, and for a variety of reasons, he was like, I don't think I want to actually do that trip. And I was like, okay. So a lot of my friends are avid hikers and active. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna do this. So I kind of put out invitations to about I think there were about 9 or 10 of my friends, and 6 of them ended up saying, yes, I want to do this. And the trip is a hike of the famous Laugavegur Trail, which is sort of in south central Iceland. And it's a very well known trail. It covers 55 kilometers, and you do the actual hike in 4 days. And then at the last hut, you're in this incredible area called Thorsmork. And we spent 2 nights there and 2 extra days hiking around that area. And so, as I had committed to this plan, I thought to myself, I can hike pretty long and hard on a one off. Like I can do between 12 and 15 miles and, a few thousand feet elevation gain over the course of a day. And then the next day I can come home and kind of lie around. However, I hadn't really done a trip where I was going to be hiking on consecutive days. And the fact that, I was more mature, and I feel really good. I mean, I nothing really hurts me. I'm very, very lucky that I can say that. I also wanted to go about it in a wise and prepared way. Because when you're out there in the wilderness and you're in a hut and there's no Wi-Fi and there's no cell service, you know, you don't want to have a day where you feel unprepared. So I thought that I would just, be practical and really go about this and find someone who knew what they were doing. And I wish that I could remember how I came across you, Rowan, but I maybe Substack. Is that possible?
Maybe I don't, not me personally, but maybe someone was
Yeah.
sharing something on there.
I yeah, I honestly don't remember how I came across Summit Strength, but I did. It like entered my consciousness and I looked at it and I thought, "Oh my God, this is actually extraordinary because you can go to a gym and find a trainer and get conditioned, but it isn't really specific to hiking. And there are things that are different about hiking. And I just thought, I'm going to do this because I want to go out there and I want every day to feel great and I want to feel excited and ready and more than capable of, taking on every day of this extraordinary experience. And that led me to you.
So then tell us a little bit about the training you did, through Summit Strength. What did your program look like? What types of things did you work through? Give us the rundown there.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I honestly, I'd rather die than do a series of burpees, to be honest. I've always been fit and I value being fit and strong, but I am not a person who kind of enjoys exercise just for the sake of exercise. And one of the things that I really loved about working with you and about how you went about training was that you started by having me do these sort of fundamental assessments of where I was now with very specific movements, strengths of different muscle groups. And it was horrifying and hilarious both at the same time. And I could do something with great ease on one leg and then sort of not be able to do it at all on the other leg. So I loved that it was targeted really, truly specifically to me because everybody is different and every body is different. And so, you were great about being realistic of like, okay, realistically, how many hours a week do you have to train? And what is that going to look like? Do you have like 4 hours one day, but an hour every other day? So you took my schedule into account. And I gave a lot of thought to that about, okay, what do I really have to give? And how am I going to balance this with my work and my other, with my relational demands and things like that. And then the program was this awesome combination of course, hiking and weighted walking with weights in my pack, which turned out to be something I loved. Because the first time I did it, I was like, my God, I really feel this in my body, right? And it's not that I'm cavalier, but I think I am a person who's like, hey, I'm just going to chuck this dumbbell like back in my backpack and head out. And so uh, so it was a combination of that and a little bit of cardio and very, very specific sort of weight training, muscle training that was unlike anything else I had done before, right? It wasn't just grabbing a kettlebell and doing countless squats or lunges. And I really enjoyed the exercises. I really, really liked them. I was like, oh, this is so cool. And for example, I can tell you really specifically that after a hike where I would climb, maybe 2,000 feet of elevation gain, give or take, I was really, really sore in my hip flexors, right? You're like lifting your legs up higher than just taking a stride as you do when you naturally walk somewhere. And there were exercises specific to building up that hip flexor strength. And it was like I just never got sore anymore there. I could actually experience how effective it was. And it was such a simple, controlled move, that done in these sets. And it sort of got more and more intense and ramped up as we got closer and closer to the date that I left to go on my hike, with a really great sort of cool down period, just immediately preceding. And it held my attention. Every month there was a different set of exercises. So that was kind of fun and interesting. Like every month I would open up the app and be like, okay, what am I going to do now? And do I get to do the blackbirds still? Because I really enjoyed those. Oh, no blackbirds this month. Okay. So it just worked so well for me. I wish I could be more specific, but it really was exactly what I needed.
And then beyond what you mentioned so far, was there anything else different in there which maybe you hadn't done before or you hadn't considered?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that um, cardio is important, and I am in a way I'm lucky because I live at altitude. And I've always felt that my sort of oxygen capacity wasn't super great. So, of course, I'm going to be in an advantage, training at altitude and then going down to a much lower altitude in Iceland. But, you know, there were exercises around that, around your lung capacity, and also sort of, I think the exercises were called grinding, where you just really, really work through this super high resistance and get into a rhythm with it, which was something I had never done before. And I sort of would just do the exercises and not necessarily question like, well, why am I doing this or what is this doing? But I could absolutely feel how it contributed to my overall fitness and to targeting specific muscle groups and mechanics of hiking. And the other thing was just getting in the habit of hiking with a weighted pack, right? That changes things. And it is an important consideration because, it's kind of, we, those of us who hike around where we live, we head out and we have maybe our little backpack with a bladder in it, and some snacks and, possibly a rain jacket. But I had to carry a lot more on my hike, although we did not carry all of our gear. We were a little bit bougie and we had luggage transfers from hut to hut, so that was fantastic. But regardless, we had a lot of stuff in our pack to account for all of the climate changes that you might experience in the course of a day in Iceland. And that was really important. So it seems really obvious now, but at the time I was like, oh yeah, well, of course I'm gonna hike with my pack, and it's gonna get heavier and heavier until it doesn't really feel that heavy anymore.
And then throughout the preparation process, were there any particular roadblocks that got in the way? And if so, how did you go about overcoming them?
Hmm. Um, You know, to be honest, I really can't think of any. I mean, there were certainly times where, let's say I planned to do a really, really long hike and it was just pouring rain that day, or maybe it snowed that day, right? Because I, I left at the very end of July and we started working together in March. So, in Colorado, March is the snowiest month. So I think that there were certain adaptations, and I had to make sure that I could sort of, be a little more flexible with my schedule. And, but I'm a very compliant patient. And so I really, I really tried to adhere strictly to my training program. And for the most part, I did. In terms of roadblocks with specific exercises, I know that there were a couple of exercises that you had put in my programs, and I have a bad shoulder. Actually, I have two bad shoulders, but one is a little more needs a little more attention than the other. And so, for example, I would try that exercise and be like, "Oh, yeah, that's not working. Like that hurts, and I really can't do that." And then I would just message you and say, like, "This is really kind of tweaking my bad shoulder," and you'd replace it with something else, and on we'd go. So for me, there were no massive stumbling blocks, and the ability to, modify certain exercises to, whatever my sort of congenital issues were was really helpful.
And then, with all that being said, we've talked about the preparations, we talked about the training. Let's hear about the trip. Give us the rundown. How did it all go?
You know what? It went great. It really did. I mean, I can tell you with absolute confidence that I felt really, really well prepared. So the mileage, to the best of my recollection, we did about 7.5 miles and then about 7 miles, which is not a tremendous amount of mileage, but there was constant up and down. And I'll circle back to that. And then we had about a 10.5 mile day and then a 10 mile day. And then the two bonus days were then about 8 miles and then a short one around 3 miles. So where I live, if I'm going to do some elevation, in Colorado, it's like you tend to go up, 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 and then you go down, down, down. But Iceland is very different. And Iceland, you're constantly climbing and then descending and climbing and then descending. And that in part is due to the sort of volcanic nature of that island, of that land mass. And I remember that towards the end of my training, I did consistent stair climbing. And where I live in the city of Boulder, there's an awesome trail called the Sanitas Trail that climbs this little mountain in town called Sanitas. And it's basically climbing stairs for a couple of miles. And so I just did that once or twice a week, every single week. And out on the hike, I kept turning to my friend who lives here with me, who did some training like with me. I would say to her, like, okay, today Rowan says I have to go climb stairs, so let's go climb Sanitas. And I would turn to her and say, like, thank God we climbed Sanitas so many times. And she agreed. So the hike is, it's fascinating. You really transverse significantly different terrain almost every day. You go through this extraordinary volcanic area where it is just black sand and these black chunks of like obsidian rock that is, from volcanic eruptions. And then you come into these sort of rust colored hills and huge gorges and waterfalls everywhere, and these pockets of steam coming out of the ground because there are these little bubbling geysers with boiling water just everywhere you walk surrounding you. And then towards the end of the trail, you come into a more traditionally sort of wooded birch forests that is yet again completely different from anything you've done before. And, I can honestly say that I was not in pain. I was not even terribly sore. You had provided me, and we had also spoken about, what do I do for recovery, right? Because I know I don't want to end the hike and just get into the hut and plop down in a chair and sit there. And so I was very conscious of sort of unwinding and doing some stretching and recovery exercises, which I think made a huge difference. And um, it was a bunch of women out there on the trail being led by we had this extraordinary Icelandic guide named Sigrun, and it was camaraderie and it was fascinating. And for me, we did river crossings, which required, we did 4 river crossings, and you have to have water shoes and either, take your hiking pants off or pull them all the way up. And at first, I was sort of, a little bit cautious about the river crossings, but they tended to occur towards the end of the day's hike. And what I what I found was that I actually started to look forward to them because my feet would get in that glacial, freezing cold water, and it felt so good. Like totally renewing. And I'd come out on the other side of the river. I'm like, okay, let's go for another like 5 or 6 miles. And I felt great. And I think for me, the biggest challenge, and I think I can say this for a lot of us who are out there, was the weather. The weather was highly changeable. And Iceland, when you think of summer, it's not what you will find or encounter in Iceland in quote unquote summer. It really maybe barely gets to 60 degrees on any given day if you're lucky. And out on the trail, it's significantly colder. There was a tremendous amount of rain, very, very high winds one day, and I mean really high winds. And so you're in this sort of constant process of like kind of bundling up and making yourself waterproof and, hunkering down against the wind. And then you might get a break and the sun might even appear. And then you're sort of, ventilating yourself and unzipping things or taking layers off. But you know, we all sort of got the hang of it really quickly, and it was all part of the experience. I mean, it was just a part of the experience that made it really kind of incredible. And you know, you get to that hut at the end of the day, and you have a really good sense of accomplishment.
And then throughout the trip, were there any other, I guess, major challenges you faced or anything you ran into which I guess you hadn't really considered before you head off on this adventure?
Um, well, you know, honestly, I think um, I have to say no, because our outfitter did a very, very good job of preparing us. Um, I felt very physically and mentally well prepared, you know, through our work together. And one of my friends who came with me is a physician. And so she brought all of these things with her that ended up being of use to a lot of us who were on the trip. You know, honestly, not so much myself, but I mean, she practically could have done surgery on the side of the trail if she needed to. I think that you know, I'm lucky that I don't have any chronic issues like a sciatica. I don't have back problems, but there were people, there were women who were part of my group, and the larger group who, you know, one woman did have some pretty significant sciatica, and fortunately, my friend was had some lidocaine patches that are transdermal, and so, you know, she thought she wouldn't be able to do it one day, and in the end, she did. But no, I don't think there was anything that really came out of the blue as a surprise. I think between my training and conditioning and the outfitter, I felt pretty well prepared.
And then after the hike, so you got
Mhm.
through the days, you got through it all, like at the end, how did you feel? Like what was going through your head and did you do anything to celebrate?
I I just felt great. I felt so happy and incredibly peaceful. I was very happy to be completely disconnected from all electronic devices, from means of communication, and to really just be out there in these simple, you know, simple accommodations. We would all make these communal meals that were great. And as you know, I wasn't ready to go back. I really could have stayed out in the huts for a few more days. I really loved that experience. And I, I did celebrate in a way when my hike was over. That day, my husband and my youngest child, who is my only daughter, who is in her early 20s, and one of her best friends flew over and met me when we got back to Reykjavik. And then we rented a car and explored the north coast of Iceland, which was great because I really fell in love with the country and I was excited to see more of it. And we ate some amazing meals and we had some incredible experiences. And we rode little furry Icelandic horses who are really, they're so cool. They're so small and they're incredibly sturdy. And my husband is 6'3" and 220 pounds. And, you know, there's this teeny tiny horse and And, it was a funny image, but the horse was really righteous. And so I think by being able to stay there and experience the country and the landscape in a different way, that definitely felt like a celebration. And, I think my family was very happy for me and proud of me and loved seeing the photographs. And yeah, it was great. And I was away for a very long time. So, the sign of a really good vacation, I think, is when you feel ready to come home. And I think when it was time to come back, I was like, okay, I feel ready. Like I've sort of assimilated this and reset, and it was definitely life changing. I mean, it clarifies. I think for me, it certainly clarifies what's really important, and how much I get from being outside, and where cars can't go, for lack of a better way of explaining it, and seeing these places that you can really only see if you hike there. And, taking life at a slightly slower pace. And of course, that I was able to have this experience with six of my friends who I love, and who brought something different to the experience and the time we shared together. And everybody seemed to gel really nicely, because, for the most, a few of my friends knew one another, but, then I had friends from other states who didn't know one another. And it just was kind of this magical, perfect convergence. So, yeah, I'm still celebrating in a quiet way.
And then now that you are home and, you've kind of thought about things, you've reset, and as you sort of said, you're just back in the swing. What are you thinking for your hiking moving forward? What's the plan of attack? Have you got any other adventures in your sights, or what are you
Oh,
thinking?
totally. Oh my God. A friend of mine, I keep sending these hikes, and my friend said, "You're completely obsessed." I said, "Well, it isn't that I've suddenly become obsessed. I've always been obsessed. My life wasn't arranged in a way where I could actually do the trips, right? Because my children are now all independent and adult. And so, yeah, I have a friend who did the Tour de Mont Blanc, where you circumnavigate Mont Blanc and you hike through Italy, Switzerland, and France. And that is a trip that I've been thinking about also for a few years. And I would love to do that. And I'm sort of thinking, oh, maybe in 2 summers, right? Maybe we'll do like summer of 2027, and we will let the boys come, and we'll have a co-ed trip. And there are many operators that can either design a self-guided tour de Mont Blanc and arrange your lodging and even do luggage transfers if you choose to do that. And also trips with guides. So that's something that I would very much like to do. I would like to do the Alta Via, which there are actually a few of them in northern Italy that are these very old hikes through the Dolomites. And a lot of them have a lot of significance for the world wars, because it was territory that was, disputed. And at one point, it was sort of part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and then it became Italy. And for anyone who's ever been to that part of Italy, it's indescribably beautiful in its own way, right? A very different way from Iceland. But yeah, I mean, there are those really big projects that I believe I will get to over the course of the next several years. And then I live in a state that is absolutely great for hiking. One of the things in Colorado that I have not done, but I have yet to do, is there is a hike between Crested Butte and Aspen. And it's, I think, between 10 and 11 miles, and you gain, I think, about 3,000 feet elevation through the course of the hike. And you can do it in either direction. And then you end up in, I mean, both Crested Butte and Aspen are really great mountain towns. So yeah, I always sort of have a little project in mind, both local and far and wide. Yeah, yeah.
And then if anyone was listening to this today and they were like, you know what, Iceland has been on my list for a while, and this trip, is something I really wouldn't mind doing, or it definitely appeals to me. What advice would you give them?
Oh, absolutely do it. I mean, I would encourage anyone who likes to hike the Laugavegur Trail. It is, you know, it's not, there's nothing technical about it, right? You don't need any technical climbing skills, which I don't have. And frankly, I am not interested in necessarily tackling on any of my hikes. I think that combining your love of hiking and being able to see Iceland in this way is just a really unique combination. And I think that that's why people come from all over the world to do it. When you get to each hut at the end of the day, it's not just you. There are other people hiking the trail, and we met people from Belgium and Australia and South Korea and France and people from all over the states. And that's kind of lovely too, right? That you're all from all over the world and you're all there to enjoy the same experience. And I think that there's power in that. There are a lot of outfitters that will help you to, tackle the Laugavegur Trail. And there are trips that, again, like mine, it's sort of all in. They provide the food. They were also able to accommodate some dietary restrictions that some of us had, which was terrific. And they will do the luggage transfers. But for example, flying back from Reykjavik on the plane, I sat next to a American guy who had also hiked the trail a few days, a little bit after me, and they carried everything on their back, all their food, all their gear, and stayed in the huts, right? So they had just made the reservations to stay in the huts. So there are different ways of approaching the hike, depending on what you're comfortable with. At the huts, a lot of people pitched tents. There were different areas for tent camping. So I would absolutely encourage anyone who's curious to do it. I think it's just an extraordinary experience in a lot of different ways.
And then as we're coming to the end of this episode now, and as we covered some really, really, really good stuff. And is there anything else you would like to add, I guess, that you haven't had a chance to cover today, or anything else you might be interested for listeners who are considering or thinking about this type of trip?
Oh, um, I think the thing that I want to say really has to do with age, right? Um, I, um, as I said, I live in Boulder, and Boulder has often been called like the fittest city on earth. And it's true. We have a lot of professional athletes. We have a lot of just insanely fit people. And, those of us who live here joke about, there's just this pressure. Like, you can't just sit around, right? Like, you have to get out there and do things. And I, I have always, it's always been important to me to be active and strong and vital and healthy. But, you don't have to sort of start from this place of having a lifetime of hiking. You don't have to, already be this sort of, really highly conditioned person. I would really encourage people to believe in themselves and believe that, with the right training and time, you can absolutely engage in an experience like this. And I think if you have ever even thought, well, what if? I just go for it, right? It's so much of this is mental, and I think that a lot of times we maybe get stuck in these thought cycles of, well, I'm this old, and so therefore I really shouldn't or can't or what have you. But I'll tell you, I speak as a about to be 61-year-old. One of my friends who came on the trip with me was 67. We met people in the huts who were in their 70s. So don't make decisions based out of fear, and seek your counsel and have your allies, and go for it. Yeah, I think it was really impactful, I think, for all of us who did this, that we had this goal and we spent this time getting ready for it, and then we did it, and we had this extraordinary trip and met people from all over, and it was something that we will remember forever for the rest of our lives. So I want to encourage people to get out there and challenge themselves and go for it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, this has been absolutely amazing, Amy. And I really,
Thank
really
you,
do
Rowan.
appreciate you coming on and just talking about this journey, this experience. And, just I think it's been really, really, really interesting. And I think a lot of people
Oh,
listening to this will get a lot of value out of this as well. So I just want to say a big thank you for coming on. I think this has been a fantastic episode. And yeah, I think a lot of people are going to get some great inspiration out of all of this.
oh, thank you. I mean, I really loved working with you, and it was a joy. It really was. And I thought of you often out there on the trail, and what you do is really unique, and that counts for a lot, but it also works, and it was just invaluable. So I thank you. Because now I literally feel like I have no desire to summit Everest, which is really mountaineering, but I'm like, you know, I can do Tour de Mont Blanc because I've got Rowan and no problem, and he'll just whip me into shape. So you get a lot of credit also. That's important.
Oh, fantastic. I appreciate that. And it was such a pleasure having you on board. So, with that being said, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an awesome
You're
episode. And
welcome.
I'm really looking forward to seeing, what you've got in the future ahead.
Thanks. I'm sure you'll be the second to know.
So there we go, guys. I really do hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Last thing I will say before I wrap things up, if anyone was interested in learning a little bit more about the training that Amy used to prepare for this adventure, all you need to do is go to summitstrength.com.au/online. Now, on that page, there's a big video which talks through our programs and our training. And if it is something you want interested in exploring a little bit more, there's a link on that page where you can book a call with our team. We can have a little bit of a chat to learn about you, your needs, your goals, and your hiking, and see if and how we may be able to help you out. So if you want to learn a little bit more, go to summitstrength.com.au/online, and we can take it from there. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. I really do hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I hope it inspires a few people to get out there and maybe explore Iceland on your bucket list. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.